There's a small town on the border of Belgium and the Netherlands where the national boundary runs directly through people's houses, through kitchens, through living rooms. In one case, straight through the front door, meaning the country you legally enter when you step inside depends entirely on which side of the doorframe you cross. That town is called Baarle, and it's so complicated that some buildings have two addresses, two sets of tax rules, two fire departments, and two governments responsible for the same patch of land. But here's the thing, Baarle isn't a quirk. Baarle is a symptom, because Belgium itself, the entire country, is kind of an accident, a nation invented by committee in a panic by people who weren't Belgian to solve a problem that had nothing to do with the people living there. The country that wasn't supposed to happen. Let's start with the map. For most of history, the land we now call Belgium didn't really have a name of its own. It was called the Low Countries, or the Spanish Netherlands, or the Austrian Netherlands, always named after whoever happened to own it at the time. It was passed around like an inheritance nobody quite wanted, fought over by France, Spain, Austria, and later the Dutch Republic, because of one simple geographic fact. It sits at the crossroads of everything. The ports of Antwerp and Ghent made this region one of the wealthiest in Europe. The flat terrain made it one of the easiest to invade. And that combination, wealth plus vulnerability, meant the major powers of Europe spent centuries fighting over it rather than letting it govern itself. By the late 1700s, it was Austrian territory. Then Napoleon rolled through, absorbed it into France, and for a brief period the region simply was France. But Napoleon lost. And when the great powers of Europe sat down at the Congress of Vienna in 1815 to redraw the continent's borders after decades of war, they had a problem. France was too powerful to leave unchecked. Specifically, the northern French border, which now ran right up to what is modern-day Belgium, was dangerously close to the coast, dangerously close to the Rhine, and dangerously close to Britain's worst nightmare, a hostile power controlling the English Channel ports. The solution they arrived at was elegant in theory and catastrophic in practice. They would create a buffer state. They would take the former Austrian Netherlands in the south, combine it with the Dutch-speaking United Provinces in the north, and fuse them into a single kingdom. The United Kingdom of the Netherlands, ruled by the Dutch King William I. The Belgians, or the people who would eventually become Belgian, were not consulted. Why the merger failed? On paper, this made sense. Culturally, economically, geographically, the Low Countries shared enough history to justify a union. In practice, it was a disaster from almost the first day. The problems were deep and numerous. In the south, the population was largely Catholic. In the north, Protestant. In the south, the economy was built on manufacturing and trade. Antwerp, Ghent, and Liège were industrial cities. In the north, it was agriculture and colonial commerce. And the language situation was genuinely chaotic. The urban south spoke French, the rural south spoke Flemish dialects, the north spoke Dutch, and the new king insisted on Dutch as the official language of the entire kingdom. King William I was not a subtle man. He centralized power, favored Dutch merchants, imposed Dutch bureaucracy, and treated the southern provinces as a junior partner. The Catholic Church in the south, historically one of the most powerful institutions in the region, found itself marginalized. What happened next is one of history's more surprising coalitions. The French-speaking liberal bourgeoisie of Brussels and the Catholic clergy of Flanders and Wallonia, two groups who agreed on almost nothing, united around one common cause: getting rid of William I. The spark came on the night of August 25, 1830. An opera house in Brussels was staging a performance of La Muette de Portishead, a French opera about a Neapolitan uprising against Spanish rule. The crowd was already agitated. By the time the second act ended, people were in the streets. Within days, barricades had gone up across Brussels. Within weeks, the revolution had spread. William sent in troops. The troops were pushed back, and the southern provinces declared themselves independent. The great powers invent a country. Now here is where it gets truly strange. The revolutionary leaders of 1830 had not agreed on what they actually wanted. Some wanted to reunite with France. Some wanted their own republic. Some wanted a constitutional monarchy under a French prince. They agreed on almost nothing, except that they didn't want William I. But the great powers of Europe, Britain, France, Prussia, Austria, Russia, couldn't allow this chaos to continue. Another French revolutionary state on the Channel coast? Unacceptable. An unstable vacuum in the heart of Europe? Also unacceptable. So in November of 1830, they did something remarkable. They formally recognized a new country that didn't yet have a constitution, a monarch, a defined territory, or even an agreed-upon name. They called it Belgium, derived from Belgica, the ancient Roman province that once occupied roughly the same geography. What followed was less like nation-building and more like contract negotiation. The great powers dictated the terms. Belgium would be permanently neutral. It couldn't join alliances. It couldn't be used as a staging ground for invasions. Its neutrality would be guaranteed by all the major European powers, a promise that would hold for 84 years until Germany invaded in 1914, an event that would eventually drag Britain into the First World War. They also needed a king. The Belgians offered the throne to a French prince, which the British immediately vetoed. They tried a different French candidate, vetoed again. After months of diplomatic wrangling, they settled on Leopold of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, a German prince who was already well connected in European royal circles and had conveniently just turned down the throne of Greece. On July 21, 1831, a date still celebrated as Belgian National Day, Leopold I was sworn in as King of the Belgians. Not King of Belgium, King of the Belgians, a deliberately constitutional phrasing, acknowledging that his authority came from the people, not from divine right. The borders were settled by committee. Large chunks of Luxembourg went to the Netherlands. Pieces of Limburg were divided up. Communities that had lived together for generations found themselves on different sides of new lines. And in one small corner of what would become the Belgian-Dutch border, the negotiations produced something so tangled that it has never been properly resolved. That's where we get back to Baarle, the town where the border makes no sense. Baarle is actually two towns occupying the same physical space. There is Baarle-Hertog, which is Belgian, and Baarle-Nassau, which is Dutch. They are not separated by a clean line. They are interlocked in a jigsaw of 22 Belgian enclaves sitting inside Dutch territory. And within some of those Belgian enclaves, there are further Dutch counter-enclaves sitting inside the Belgian enclaves inside the Dutch territory. This situation wasn't created in 1830. It predates Belgium by several centuries, the result of medieval land grants, feudal divisions, and disputed inheritances between the Duke of Brabant and the Lords of Breda. When the Belgian-Dutch border was drawn, diplomats essentially looked at this impossible tangle and decided to leave it exactly as it was. The result is a town where the border runs through gardens, down hallways, across cafe tables. For most of the 20th century, different countries had different closing times for shops and restaurants. So if a bar in Dutch territory had to close at midnight, the owner would ask customers to shift 2 meters to the left into Belgian territory, where they could keep drinking. During World War II, when Germany occupied Belgium but not the Netherlands, the borders between Baarle-Hertog and Baarle-Nassau became genuine escape routes, with Jewish families sometimes moving between enclaves to stay a few steps ahead of occupation authorities. Today, the border is marked by small white crosses in the pavement. Tourists come from across Europe to photograph themselves standing in 2 countries simultaneously. The question Belgium still hasn't answered. But here is the deeper question, the one that Baarle quietly illustrates on a small scale. Belgium was created as a solution to a diplomatic problem. It was not created because the Flemish weavers of Ghent and the French-speaking lawyers of Brussels had decided they were one people with a shared identity. It was created because the great powers needed a buffer and reached for the most convenient geographic option available. Nearly 200 years later, Belgium is still negotiating what it actually is. The language divide between Flanders, Dutch-speaking, roughly 60% of the population, increasingly wealthy and politically assertive, and Wallonia, French-speaking, historically industrial, now economically struggling. has never been resolved. It has simply been managed. Belgium has gone through multiple rounds of constitutional reform, devolving more and more power to regional governments until the Belgian federal state sometimes resembles less a country and more a holding company for two distinct nations that happen to share a king and a football team. In 2010 and 2011, Belgium went 541 days without a functioning federal government. At the time, the longest such period any democracy had ever recorded. The cause was a breakdown in negotiations between Flemish and Francophone political parties over the division of a single electoral district on the outskirts of Brussels. Half a year without a government over a suburb. And yet Belgium persists. Brussels is the de facto capital of the European Union, a deeply Belgian irony, since the EU is itself a project designed to make national borders less important in a country whose own borders were always somewhat arbitrary. NATO is headquartered there. The headquarters of hundreds of international institutions crowd the city's European quarter. Belgium exists in part because it turns out to be very convenient for everyone else that it does. The bigger map. So why does Belgium exist? Because in 1830, the great powers of Europe needed a buffer. Because a revolution happened on the night of an opera. Because a German prince needed a throne. Because medieval feudal land grants in a small town on the Dutch border were too complicated to untangle. Because French-speaking liberals and Flemish Catholics found themselves, briefly, on the same side. Belgium is not an accident, exactly. It's more like an improvisation, a solution to a problem, built from pieces that didn't quite fit, held together by compromise and careful constitutional engineering, and, occasionally, sheer institutional inertia. And, in that sense, it might be the most honest country in Europe. Because most nations tell themselves a story about deep historical roots, ancient peoples, and inevitable geography. Belgium's story is basically, we needed somewhere to put the border, and this seemed reasonable at the time. Which, if you look closely enough at almost any map, is more or less how all of them got there. If you found this video interesting, there's a lot more where that came from, because the world is full of borders, just like this one. Lines on maps that seem boring until you realize entire geopolitical strategies are built around them. Make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on, because we're just getting started. I'll see you next time on the Bigger Map channel.